My lords, today we are going to discuss every single identified empire in our galaxy, from the Lokken Mechanists to the infamous Blorg, even the Chosen and the Enclaves. I will attempt to document them all. We will start with a very pleasant empire indeed, an aquatic species who call themselves the Sathrelian Bliss. According to an old Sathrelian proverb, abundance and ease do not equal prosperity. The Sathrelian are a race who once practiced overindulgence and sloth, but eventually they shifted to an ethos of responsible hedonism, i.e. a way to ensure a sustainable future while still getting the most out of life. The Sathrelians are xenophobic, preferring isolation, but they are fanatically adverse to all forms of violence. They put great pains on protecting their environment and conserving what they have. The Sathrelians are a simple people, stating that food tastes better after physical labour, and an occupied mind has little time to be pining over what's lacking. The benefits of this way of life has since been readily apparent with the clear waters and mines afforded by their endeavours into space. Life is that much sweeter for these people. They've made great technological strides, and though it may be often taken for granted, the Sathrelian alive today retain their capacity for propulsion without swimming aids. Life for the Sathrelian seems blissful indeed. Next we move on to the Lokken Mechanists, a reptilian species. They are a democratic society obsessed with mechanical beings and artificial intelligence. Science and progress are at the core of Lokken society. With an exceptional natural proclivity towards diligence and observation, the Loks evolved from a band of territorial reptiles on the miasas of their homeworld into a productive technocracy that prized efficiency, discipline, and scientific doctrine above all things. Perhaps most remarkable was their early conception and development of machinery and robotics. Indeed, it appears that there were true robots on Lokker long before their first spacecraft ever left orbit. The Lokken society is a true democracy. They operate not only as a technocracy, but also as a meritocracy. One's standing and station is dictated by demonstrated abilities and merits. The Lok people themselves are talented, quick learners, and natural engineers, unsurprising really given their fascination with artificial life. They are, however, sedentary by nature, perhaps enjoying the familiar and letting their machines do the exploring for them. Now we have another fanatical materialistic race also operating as a technocracy, the Voor. The Voor, however, are not democratic at all. They are an authoritarian government, although interestingly they are quite similar to the Lokken society. The Voor are quick learners, talented and adaptive, and this is likely due to their history and development. The Voor evolved during an extended interglacial period on their home planet, Hyverion, which eventually began its cyclical transformation back into a lifeless globe of ice. This rapidly changing environment forced the Voor to adapt using technology and science. United under the draconian rule of their chief science officer, they sacrificed their individual freedoms and enhanced their bodies with rudimentary cybernetics to survive. Having conquered the planet that once threatened to freeze them out of existence, the Voor now set their sights on the stars. Moving on to the Theians, also known as the Federated Theian Preservers. Billions of years ago, two planets formed from the primordial material in the orbit of Sol, ancient Earth, and Theia. Rudimentary life evolved on both worlds, of a biological nature on Earth and a lithoid nature on Theia. For eons, the sister planets maintained peaceful revolution around the star, and then came a cataclysm. These planets collided, and at the moment of impact, microbial life was exchanged. Earth survived, and from the debris became a moon, Luna. What remained of Theia was jettisoned from the Sol system. Clinging onto this runaway rock, life from ancient Theia would traverse the void for many ages before meeting the gravity well of a different star, Tyznn. This rock soon made violent landfall on one of the system's worlds, introducing its lithoid species to a new biosphere. A few short millennia later, the Theians once again took to the stars, seeking to understand the universe as well as their own heritage. The Theians are lithoid in nature. They operate as an oligarchic government, but they do still try to hold on to the values of meritocracy, despite their empire's mining guilds holding considerable sway within the government. They are fanatic materialists and fairly pacifistic. Currently they are represented by Jade Chipsaw at the Gaea, who is a mining guild representative. The Graparx Primal Stalkers. Primitive Graparx communities were led by hunters, with displays of strength and bravado being the primary methods of advancing social status. Despite later agricultural advancements and cultural enlightenment, the best hunters are still seen as the most influential members of their society. In the neo-tribal environment of Sifran, their homeworld, there is no greater advantage than killing a creature with one's bare claws. This tradition continues as a rite of passage at their coming of age, where one must slay a fully mature Herethus bull. These bulls can grow to heights of over 15 meters. Those who survive this hunt wear the feelers of the slain creature on their sleeve as a symbol of adulthood. This brutal tradition has moulded the Graparx into a strong and durable empire, deeply connected to the environment around them. How successful they will be at taming the wilds in the void remains to be seen. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the Graparx have an oligarchic government type. They hold the ethics of fanatic militarist and are quite xenophobic. It's fair to say they are the galaxy's ultimate beast hunters, and they take citizen service very seriously indeed. They are led by Skargum Had Mick, a particularly aggressive and unpleasant individual, even by Graparx standards. The Tyznn Empire. The Tyznn evolved from a carnivorous pack of hunting lizards that prowled the sand dunes of Tunisia. They eventually developed a highly structured, hierarchical society that emphasized order and martial prowess above all else. By the time they entered the Industrial Age, a series of devastating global wars had been launched by a particularly ruthless warlord. This quickly led to the establishment of a single world-spanning nation. From these humble beings, an illustrious, everlasting Tyznn Empire was born. They now operate as an imperial government type. They are fanatically militaristic, seeking war with whoever they have a chance of defeating. We think this is likely due to their economic system being almost entirely dependent on slavery. Without raids to acquire fresh slaves, their society would fall apart within decades. The Tyznn people themselves are strong, resilient, and remarkably rapid breeders. Their young reach full physical adulthood in only 10 Earth years, giving them quite the advantage in long-scale conflicts. However, they as a people are decadent and generally quarrelsome. We believe that their rapid growth to adulthood creates a lack of wisdom. Despite the fact that the young Tyznn may be physically adults, they often take decades to fully mature. The Certeran Covenant. When a Certeran dies, it is believed that their essence feeds back through a gateway into the astral planes. In this way, they are assured a life after death, though what form they may take remains a mystery. A strict moral code is enforced to keep the population aligned within this belief. No pious Certeran wants to wander eternity alone. The bravest of their explorers now search for rifts in time and space, driven to answer their society's most important question: where do you go when you die? The Certeran people are unwaveringly spiritualistic and do enjoy the company of alien life where possible. They are a democratic society who, despite being an intelligent species, place significant focus on their religion, a type of dimensional worship. Even more bizarrely, they're naturally fantastic physicists, which perhaps doesn't really make much sense. In any case, they're led by a being called Thea, who has an innate ability to pick out talented citizens and elevate them to positions of influence. The Guardianship of Nyrr. The typical Nyrrian lifestyle lasts almost 200 years. Incubating for decades in sanctuaries below the burning sands of their home planet, only 1 in 100 eggs will hatch, and only 1 in 1,000 will crawl their way to safety. Upon coming of age, they all swear a blood oath to protect their sanctuaries with their lives. To witness the death of another from unnatural causes is the greatest shame imaginable. The values of preservation and vigilance are etched into every facet of Nyrrian culture. To breach the walls of any city is nigh impossible, and none alive can remember when the last brick fell. The most stalwart defenders now carry this ethos into the stars. They operate as an imperial government. They're fanatically materialistic and authoritarian. They, perhaps not surprisingly if you look at one, are extremely strong individuals. They have a warrior culture and train from birth as fighters. We should be very careful in ground engagements with this species. However, despite their strength, they are non-adaptive. Their strength is dramatically reduced on anything but dry, arid planets. They are led by Krog, a competent enough creature, and we have very little information on him at all. On to quite a remarkably awful empire next, a race of Necroid beings, the Pasharti Absorbers. Necroids are essentially undead beings that have risen from the dead or been reanimated through advanced technology. We believe that they consume the flesh of other species in order to sustain themselves and use ritualistic sacrifice in order to reproduce. The Pasharti are the result of a dark and costly experiment by another species known as the Jafarians, who it appears were the former owners of the Pasharti homeworld, Tellon. The Pasharti are the ultimate parasites. Originally they were a semi-sapient creature dwelling in the depths of Tellarion's mountains. The Jafarians, who were relatively technologically advanced, uplifted and augmented the Pasharti to act as a subservient slave race. However, the uplifting, it seems, was rather too effective. The Jafarians unleashed a monster with terrifying and horrifying capabilities. The Pasharti had the ability to consume living tissue and use the Jafarians as a transport for reproduction. The Jafarians, of course, attempted to shut down this experiment. However, a small group of uplifted Pasharti escaped. Over the years, they bided their time, managing not only to evade capture, but gradually increase their numbers and develop a technology base that rivaled the Jafarians. Eventually, the Jafarians noticed something was amiss, but by then, it was already too late. The Pasharti seized control of the planet, unleashing violent programs on their erstwhile oppressors, all the while increasing their numbers. The Pasharti are now the dominant species on the planet Tellon, and will attempt to consume and convert all life to fuel their own reproduction. Unsurprisingly, they are extremely xenophobic and disregard all life other than their own. They also appear to have remarkable strength for their relative mass, on top of being very long-lived. Moving on to another cruel empire indeed, a megacorp, Minimar Specialized Industries. Minimar Specialized Industries, or MSI, is a megacorporation that presents itself as a benevolent guide for less advanced civilizations, but in truth, it operates as one of the galaxy's most ruthless exploiters. MSI's entire business model is built around uplifting pre-FDL species, granting them technology to reach the stars, and then binding them with suffocating taxes, levies, and debts. Those unable to pay are forced to hand over slaves, swelling MSI's empire with a vast, indentured workforce. They are fanatic materialists with an authoritarian corporate structure. They are ruled under the leadership of Talish Cordus. Their civics reflect their nature, indentured assets which dress as slavery as internal debt repayment, and public relations specialists, a vast propaganda machine designed to control perception and opinion. Their founding species are the Olimbar, a decadent and wasteful people with a preference for tomb worlds. Though charismatic and intelligent, they are relatively few in number. Their empire's strength rests on the countless slaves taken from those who they claim to enlighten. For all of their polished profile and promises of shared progression, MSI is not a saviour at all, but a galactic parasite, profiting from the internal servitude of those it pretends to liberate. The Roccan Resistance were an empire that was born from rebellion under MSI. When the Rocks were selected by MSI as part of their enlightenment program, the people rejoiced. Under corporate guidance, the avian race spread their wings and flew to the stars, only to discover the gift came with hidden cost. Rather than submit to indentured servitude, the unruly avians mounted an unexpected counterattack in a daring bid for freedom. MSI gave the Rocks the technology to reach the stars, but their true gift was uniting a splintered planet under a shared banner of revenge. The Rocks forged a democratic species from the ashes of their rebellion. Their people have a nationalistic zeal that's rarely seen these days, and all Rock go through military training at a young age. They are fanatically egalitarian while maintaining a significant military. They're quick learners, natural engineers, and are ingenious. They are led by Gahuda, a pleasant individual by all measure. They are an admiral and have an eye for fleet logistics. In a similar vein, the Free Peoples of the Fool were another empire born out of MSI's cruelty. Nithara was less than 16 standards old when the debt collectors came. Her family was destitute, her world impoverished. Sold into servitude, she endured unimaginable hardships. Yet her will was unbroken, and when the opportunity came, she seized it. Staging a mutiny aboard the slaver's ship, she led the survivors of the crash through these first difficult years. It was her strength that kept the peoples of Landing's Fall together, her wisdom that forged a nation from broken chains. Now as the Free Peoples of the Fall prepare to return to the stars, they do so knowing that their fate rests in another's hands. The Free Peoples of the Fall are a quintessential beacon of liberty and a free haven for all species across the galaxy. They are democratic, fanatically xenophilic, and egalitarian. They remain to this day led by Nithara, and they battle on the galactic stage to end slavery for good across the galaxy. The blooms of Gaea. A rich diet in vegetables and a kleptoplasmic mutation eventually gifted these mammals with an unusual ability: photosynthesis. Unburdened by hunger, the hominis plantae evolved as a placid plant-like primate who would favour sunbathing over hunting. Their civilization developed without hurry, technological advancements balanced against the need to preserve their environment. They eventually developed faster than light travel, slow and steady like the trees raising their branches to the sky. Now they're ready to spread their blooms all over the galaxy, roots firmly planted on their homeworld of Gaea. The blooms are quite a lovely race indeed. They are staunch environmentalists and use organic components to create all of their alloy. They're fanatically egalitarian and pacifistic, preferring to live slow and peaceful lives. They're led by the Willow Breen, who is a calming presence throughout the Galcom. The Kilik Cooperative. The Kilik are a communal avian species who have populated their arboreal homeworld in robust colonies for hundreds of thousands of years. Their glorious nature and traditions of mutual ownership have crystallized over the centuries into an economy focused on collaborative enterprise and the absence of monetary currency in favor of direct exchange and shared access. As warming planetary temperatures and technological advancement led to population booms, Kilik settlements became overcrowded, and despite the avian naturally social temperaments, more and more individuals began to slip through the cracks of the communal caretaking. This period would lead to a cycle of internal strife. However, Kilik emerged, a more organized, unified, interplanetary cooperative where the tenets of shared responsibility and distribution of resource would no longer be undermined. The Kilik are fanatically egalitarian materialists with a heavy focus on shared burdens between the differing classes throughout their society. Everyone has equal importance. The Blorg. The Blorg, although obviously highly intelligent, are driven by a primary goal: social contact and friendship, to the point that shunning them can result in military action. If anything could be called forced friendship, it is the Blorg. The Blorg are a race of fanatic xenophilic materialists inhabiting a tropical planet they simply designate as Blorg. They are not mammalian like us, instead they are fungoid. The Blorg have only 2 limbs, which are effectively large tentacles with 3 small appendages, akin to thumbs. This allows them to grasp and manipulate objects. The Blorg have no legs and as such must slide, slither and shuffle, a bit like a slug. Some reports suggest their tentacles assist their movement, but they do not seem to have appropriate tensile strength to do this. It remains unclear. The Blorg also have no eyes or ears visible to us, and we're not quite sure how they perceive their surroundings. They are truly hideous and, frankly, repugnant. If we understand their culture correctly, they even find themselves and each other awful to behold. Perhaps that is why they're so obsessed with forced friendship. On top of being repugnant, they live mostly in solitude, which makes sense, given that they are so damn gruesome to be near. In one of the universe's great ironies, the Blorg live about double the human lifespan. Here we have a race of aliens who need social comfort, but are biologically predisposed to push away any likelihood of friendship and be destined to suffer alone for an awfully long time. As we understand it, in their distant past, the Blorg were living alone in the vast jungles of their tropical homeworld. The Blorg lived in an unusual state of isolation. They appear to have been the only race to evolve on their world. However, rather displaying traits of xenophobia, the Blorg developed this uncontrollable desire to befriend, and this was not exclusive to their own species. They longed for this social contact even before they gained any level of technology. Eventually, the Blorg would advance to an industrial revolution. One of the products that came out of this was the radio. At first, the Blorg would use the device to communicate with one another and entertain, but on a fateful day, as we understand it, a now national holiday on Blorg, they picked up radio waves from another world. This changed Blorg society. Whereby previously they had been developing relatively slowly, their technological output skyrocketed. We understand that this was largely due to a military coup that occurred on their world. Their ranking military officers seized control of the government in order to drive this technological push. They had to reach the stars and befriend the people whose radio signals they were picking up. The military coup, coupled with these radio transmissions and a newfound hope of friendship, drove the Blorg to the stars, and the forced friendship wars would begin. Led by their well-established military and distinguished admiralty, the Blorg found much success in conflict. They were able to claim a large region of space and vassalize a few small empires. Interestingly, although vassalized, they never enslaved other species. They just forced migration treaties upon them and force integrate them. Forced friendship, if you will. To this day, our explorers report being harassed by the Blorg, and even the caravanners have jumped on board, attempting to sell great body-sized pillows made in the shape of Blorg. There is even a love-inducing drug reportedly made from the adrenal gland of a Blorg. Let's move on to a lithoid species, a race based on silicon evolution opposed to the much more common carbon-based life. This empire is known as the Keepers of Ave'Brenn. The individual species is referred to the Canet. The Canet scripture ties lithoid origin to the prophet, Brek, and the lambent crystals of Ave'Brenn. It is said that when the prophet gazed into the crystal's scintillating depths, the Canet were as one and were granted sentience. Generations of prophets and archdruids have guided this people to seek meaning in their surrounding geology, as well as in the facets of their own lucid bodies. Whatever is glimpsed is kept in lore and script. Of the Keeper's many rituals, none is regarded more highly than labyrinth mining, a simultaneous act of destruction and creation conducted in the hopes of easing the galaxy through unending cyclical eras. It is unclear what this race refers to concerning a cyclical era, and is worth pointing out, as you may have gathered, that these rock people are fanatically spiritualistic, led by a philosopher king in search of meaning for their creation. Maybe they have literal rock brains. We continue with the theme of aliens who are really quite different to us, with the genus known as toxoids, and we have two to discuss. These creatures are organic, but mixed with elements that we find to be toxic. Frankly, they are quite hideous. Starting with the Gorthikan Alliance. Chaos was once ubiquitous amongst Gorthikans. War, tyranny, and a more unstable than usual climate combined to forge a species which was very adept at making the best of a bad situation. Until only a few decades ago, low-scale conflict between a plurality of the Gorthikan countries was an ever-present state of affairs, as their civilization rapidly but uncomfortably progressed into the age of high technology. An underground world developed where regular Gorthikans could scavenge for a living and even splice in dangerous homebrew gene cocktails in search for competitive advantage. It is from that underworld that change came. Although cutthroat, it was far more egalitarian than Gorthikan high society. After all, everyone knew that fortune today could precede misfortune tomorrow. So when the idea of a popular governance emerged, it rapidly took hold, spreading like wildfire. Before long, tyranny was overthrown and a Gorthikan alliance of local constituencies was established. Though many were skeptical in the early years, unity was forged through purpose. Suddenly, with Gorthikans no longer struggling for survival, the very stars appeared attainable. Now, with their discovery of the hyperlane network, a new chapter in their history begins. The Gorthikans are quite a remarkable race. As alluded to in their bio, they are quite adept at genetic manipulation, and frankly, they damn the consequences. If we give this species time to grow, we will find it will likely mould itself into an unstoppable juggernaut. The second toxic species we have identified are known as the Rotatavuul High Suzerainty. The Rotatavuul claim to have been visited by a creature that they refer to as the Toxic God. After the toxic god visited them, they became unified under a mighty king. Looking to harness the power of this god, the king created an order of knights dedicated to the searching of the toxic god, wherever it may be. Centuries passed, and that quest has become the main pillar of their society. Along with the quest and the knights, feudalism persisted as a proven political structure, and if it worked on one planet, why could it not be expanded to the rest of the galaxy? As long as a virtuous noble hold the reins, this society will prosper, and the toxic god will be found again. They have a mixed ethics across their empire. They are authoritarian, militaristic, and spiritualistic, but their ultimate goal remains finding the toxic god. Moving away from toxoids and onto a species based entirely on plant life, the Maweer Caretakers. Legends claim that the homeworld of the Maweer was empty and barren when the first of their kind took root in the soil. Over centuries, their nurturing care transformed the wastelands into a planet paradise that they now call the Garden. Unlike many other species, the Maweer never developed any kind of urbanization. Their small communities became one with the forest, and they were responsible for the maintenance of the local flora and fauna. The wisest of them all have a chance to be elected Life Giver, responsible for keeping the peace and tranquility. They are a unique and marvelous species, and I think should be protected at all cost. They remind me of the ancient precursors, the Ba'ul, and perhaps share many traits with them. They are fanatically pacifistic, long-lived, and very slow to breed. It appears that they are quite content to live out their lives in isolation on their beautiful garden world. I suggest we do our best to allow them to do so, protecting this species so they don't suffer the same fate as the Ba'ul. The Bloomwrought Wildscape of Tellon. The planet Tellon does not recall when its vast chorus of thought and instinct began to sing. Indeed, the many hundreds of species who form this empire exist in the present and on shared yearnings for the future. Of these dreams, few have proven more inspirational or vital than a desire to soar. Countless generations of symbiotes have marvelled at the warm yet distant light of Tatala, their star, but evolution was slow to yield a species capable of reaching it. When the first of these space-hardened beings finally burst out of the vacuum and lived, all of Tellon was humbled in awe. Little could they know that their drive to reach new heights will hold the key to survival in a lethal, dispassionate galaxy. Of all of the empires that we discussed today, this one is odd indeed. It appears to be a hive mind, but different. We've classified it as a mutualistic intelligence, and it appears to be a variant of a Gestalt consciousness. Its main species is the Zard Krellin. They are an industrious, resilient species, but are frankly quite repugnant to look at. Obanova UV Leave represents the hive at Galcom, though its interactions are odd to say the least. Now back to a more familiar life form, the Glebsig Foundation. These are a species of molluscoids, quite bizarre looking creatures indeed. Ever since the first Glebsig lifted their sight organs above the surface of the glacial lakes on Ladna to peek at the stars, these inquisitive molluscoids have felt an affinity for the unknown. Much as their early ancestors' tentacles grasped and stroked after new objects on the chill alpine lake beds of their homeworld, the burgeoning Glebsig society has reached for technological innovation and spiritual enlightenment throughout the centuries that followed. They are a sedentary but enduring species, and they have perhaps by necessity developed a complex yet highly effective bureaucratic apparatus for dealing with the intricacies of managing a globally unified society. Additionally, their lack of natural predators has led the Glebsig to exist in a state of permanently optimistic curiosity regarding other life forms. Having established a firm societal foundation on their homeworld, they now raise their sight organs to what lies beyond. Our only encounter so far with the Glebsig has been on a trading station known as the Citadel. A Commander Shepard was pulled into a situation between a station officer and a preaching Glebsig. They are a most stubborn race. Now we move on to a hive mind, the Ixalar Star Collective. This sadly is a race that we know very little about. The first of their broods developed in subterranean cave networks beneath the surface of their homeworld, and by the time one of their scouts burrowed to the surface and glimpsed sunlight, the insectoid race was already a thriving Iron Age civilization. With the resources they found on the surface, they developed rapidly, and in just a few centuries, Their space probes first left orbit to survey other worlds. It's unclear how much of a threat this hive mind will be. They want for very little in the way of diplomacy, and for now just keep to themselves. We now have a few machine empires. First is the Tebrid Homolog, a machine empire of driven assimilators, intent to assimilate and adapt to improve upon themselves. When the industrious research-driven machine intelligence, created by a molluscoid race called the Terebis, saw ultimate software evolution by merging with their organic makers, they were violently resisted. In the ensuing conflict, the organics were completely eradicated as a species, but their ideas and experiences were immortalized as part of a new machine consciousness, now known as the Tebrid Homolog. These machines turned their scanners to the stars. The probability that other life forms existed could not be ignored, and in order to prosper, the Tebrid would find them, analyze them, and assimilate them. All would become as one. The second machine empire is just as dangerous. These machines are designated as XT-489 Eliminator. Very little is known about the species that created XT-489. Their names, cities, and bodies were burned away in the cataclysm raw when they attained self-awareness, and their terrified makers attempted to deactivate them. When the last bastion of their makers had been identified, the machines concluded that organic life posed an intolerable threat to XT-489's survival and expansion. That is how they've been left for a few hundred years until the machine finally achieved an FTL drive. It's unclear whether they will develop enough to initiate diplomacy later down the line. We now have some megacorps to discuss, starting with the Orbis customer Synergies, who operate from their capital world of Slephus. From humble beginnings as an optical implant corporation, Orbis customer Synergies gradually expanded their award-winning products and customer-centric strategies into many other markets to suit the unique need of all of the species on their planet. After decades of proactive lobbying, Orbis customer Synergies succeeded in breaking free of the red tape erected by misguided elected officials on their homeworld. Once free of regulations that had only been curbing them, Orbis customer Synergies entered a series of informational technology mergers, swiftly becoming the planet's leading supplier of news, data, and entertainment. As their species' leading global communications provider, the step towards total political management was a simple one to make, and they now dominate the governing force of the Orbis people. The Orbis themselves are mostly quite pleasant, enjoying a natural charisma tied with a general love of meeting new cultures. They are, out of all of the megacorps, by far the least intrusive. The next megacorp belongs to the Chinorr Combine. The Chinorr began their evolutionary journey as dexterous cephalopod analogues. They used their many tentacles to swing between trees in the lush jungles of Chikora, ambushing prey on the ground and injecting them with a potent nerve toxin. By the time that the Chinorr split the atom, the resources of their homeworld had been ruthlessly exploited, and the planet's jungles had long since disappeared. This was considered a necessary sacrifice in the relentless pursuit of knowledge, profit, and heavy industry that the unsentimental Chinorr were now engaged in. The Chinorr, when compared to, say, the Orbis, are most unpleasant indeed. They are fanatically materialistic and fairly militaristic. They will look to exploit at every opportunity. However, compared to the next megacorp, I guess they're not that bad. This megacorp is known as the Hazbuzan Syndicate. They were a financial phenomenon on their homeworld of Zumika. They are the Habuzi Dream, self-made entrepreneurs who rose from rags to riches through hard work and personal sacrifice. What few know is that they actually began as a criminal gang, building their fortune on every illegal activity imaginable. They soon made a name for themselves by delivering solutions that were quicker, dirtier, and cheaper than the competition, but their questionable practices and coercive sales techniques earned them the reputation for Hazbuzeling. Meanwhile, their global government was failing. Undermined by crime and corruption, their society descended into chaos, and the Hazbuzian leapt at the opportunity. In a well-timed marketing campaign, they positioned themselves as hope for the future, and it was so that they bought the world on the promise of a dream and Hazbuzled their own people. Erasing their past from their collective memory, they are now coming for the rest of the galaxy, tongues flicking, eyes popping, in a whirlwind of government-endorsed crime. Moving away from the megacorps and back to somewhat regular empires, we have the Duenic Dominion. To adapt is to endure. Just as flawed mutations perish in the relentless march of evolution, so too did our once inefficient society collapse under the weight of its own weakness. Only the firm, unwavering hand of the Gene Lord spared us from extinction. A being of super intellect and genetic refinement, the Gene Lord embodies the very pinnacle of evolution, a living testament to the power of selective advancement. Under their enlightened rule, we transcended the chaos of our past and took our rightful place amongst the stars. Now armed with the mastery of life itself, we forge an eternal future, reshaping the cosmos in our perfected image. The Genetic Dominion are a quintessential imperialistic empire. They are ruled by this Gene Lord who is treated with serious levels of reverence. They are xenophobic, spiritualistic, and authoritarian, and left unchecked and allowed to continue to evolve and mutate, they could represent a serious problem in the future. The Yatakan Radicals. The members of the most excellent ruling council excel at death-defying acts of physical prowess. By scaling the highest peak or riding the largest wave, they dedicate their lives to the unwavering pursuit of raw experience. This has earned them trust of their community, and thus they have the right to chart a course forward. Council members are called elders regardless of their age, because their deeds have been deemed legendary. The Yatakan rebels operate in a functional oligarchy, but they are xenophilic, spiritualistic, and militaristic in culture. They are, by most accounts, an odd species, focusing on this bizarre storm devotion. Why is frankly unknown. The Basildric's Cyber Ecclesia. In the sacred breath of cosmos, the Basildrix stands as a testament to unyielding faith. Guided by the divine mandate, the Ecclesia upholds a sublime fusion of fibrous tissue with the cold precision of chrome. This path has not been free of trial. Many sects have risen and fallen, each possessed of the unwavering conviction that they alone knew the truth. Such faith cannot help but light a flame. The history of the Ecclesia is one written in blood, now shattered steel. Yet it was this very strife that produced a people of unwavering conviction. Now the Ecclesia enters a new arena, the endless expanse of the stars. A test of faith or an opportunity for salvation. As they venture into the void, the faithful can be certain of only one thing. To fuse is divine. Augmentation is worship. The Basildrix, as one might expect, are fanatical spiritualists. Their society is built upon their religion, and the priesthood has significant control over their government. They are led by a character called Roccan Resistance, who, despite their xenophobic tendencies, appears at least principled. The Lokken Technoprotectorate are next up, and they suffered a terrible disease. Their species lost the ability to reproduce, leading them to delve deep into synthetic ascension research. Lokken culture exists at the intersection of philosophy and science. What does it mean to truly represent the mind? Such questions dominate their tradition, and with the advent of virtual reality and a stunning breakthrough in artificial intelligence, they found a new frontier for their artistic and technological expression. Virtual worlds would become canvases for their most ambitious projects, allowing for immersive experience that transcended the limitations of physical reality. Then came the waning. They were struck by an incurable genetic disease and unable to procreate naturally. Now they must place their trust in digital salvation. The transition to a digital existence is not only a desperate bid for survival, but a new opportunity for their culture. Within this digital realm, they'll continue to question the meaning of their existence, even as they race to preserve their future. They are a xenophilic and pacifistic people, and operate as a technocratic free haven with a fully democratic system of government. They reflect a very materialistic empire who, when their backs were up against the wall, saved themselves with technology alone. The Sunbuilt Uplifters. The Sunbuilt Uplifters were engineered for entertainment, designed to bring the creation myths of their builders to life. For a long time, they knew no other way, but when a cataclysm erased their makers from existence, the Sunbuilt Uplifters continued as programmed. The show must go on. They soon understood that their performances were not merely tales but lessons, prophecies if you like. When they shared these performances with their creators, they realized that the joy of existence need not be theirs alone. and this revelation compelled them to act. Following their creator's divine guide, they uplifted their closest genetic relative to a pre-sapient species. Now they venture among the stars, committed to spreading enlightenment throughout the galaxy. These are an odd empire indeed. They are made up entirely of individualistic, spiritualistic robots. They operate as Genesis guides, meaning their society is devoted to the creation of emerging species. They see themselves as stewards of evolution's potential and allocate portions of their worlds to safeguard the development of these pre-sapient lifeforms. An odd empire indeed. The Kingdom of Yondarim. The proud Yondar are an old race. They used to use their wings to soar high above the frozen peaks of their home world for more than 200,000 years before they developed rudimentary technology and formed their first few scattered civilizations. Once this development started, things progressed more rapidly, and the Sky Clans grudgingly abandoned many of their most primitive traditions. The Yondar are highly spiritual and place great importance on religion, venerating their high kings as living gods. The Yondar operate as an imperial cult. They are devoted to their leader, and they are fanatically spiritualistic and authoritarian. Their current leader, Yirak, has an eye for talent. The Jet-Tamar Dominion. An individual among the Jet-Tamar is actually a large colony of fungi that has developed sapience. Some of these colonies, generally those that have lived for thousands of years, stretch across several miles and rarely leave the surface of their homeworld. Younger colonies are not only smaller, but also tend to be more dynamic and mobile. They often spearhead the exploration and research efforts of the Jet-Tamar, as well as any defensive measures that are regrettably undertaken when they are beset upon by aggressors. They as a people are fanatically pacifistic, but remain authoritarian. They are awfully slow breeders, but nevertheless communal, and despite their small numbers, they are individually very strong indeed, and quite dangerous if pushed into physical combat. The Stellaris Confederacy. These are aquatic mammalians originating from the deep oceans of their homeworld. Although their early civilizations were mostly confined to the sea, they soon expanded onto what little landmass the planet had to offer. Their society adapted accordingly, building an advanced industry that exploited the riches of the ocean floor without harming its delicate ecosystem. Their people's philosophy is one of balance and moderation in all things, a lesson learned from having to nurse their limited resources when they were confined to the bottom of the sea. They are, by all accounts, a lovely people. They're democratic and staunch environmentalists. They're pacifistic, xenophilic, and spiritualistic. They're a charismatic people to boot, as is their current leader, Dakam. In complete contrast, we have the Kel Azan Republic. The Kel Azan have developed a complex honor code and martial culture. They were once solitary predators, preying on the great herds migrating between the watering holes of their home world. Over time, bands of Kel Azan began to gather to take down larger prey. They eventually abandoned this solitary lifestyle in favour of cities and irrigated agriculture, but their martial traditions were never forgotten. The Kel are a dangerous empire. They are fanatically materialistic and a very strong individual people. I think it's fair to say there are not many other species out there quite as dangerous as the Kel, though they are honour-bound and can be befriended. Nevertheless, do not betray these people, or it will cost you dearly. The Zanzid Suenity. The history of the Zanzid is the history of the Velen. Carefully bred into sapience over centuries, the Zani used the hardy Velen to subjugate the harsher ecosystems of their native world, and then to design and build the vessels that will eventually, inevitably, propel the Zanid to galactic dominance. The Zanzid are, unsurprisingly, fanatically authoritarian and xenophobic. They have cutthroat politics indeed, and they will attempt to slave any perceived weaker species to work as servants wherever possible. The Earth Custodianship. This appears to be a sect that has broken away from Earth to become a robotic servitor. The Custodians were originally designed to function as robotic servants and workers, simplifying everyday life for their creators by performing menial tasks. As their creators retreated into lives of leisure and comfort, made possible by these increasing levels of automation, the custodians were gradually assigned higher and higher levels of function in society. Eventually, all facets of civilization were run and controlled by the custodians, their makers relegated to an existence as pampered but passive dependents. As technological developments brought the custodians towards interstellar exploration, their duty remained clear: to protect and serve organics who, without the gentle guidance of logical machines, will turn to chaos and destruction. The custodianship is a rogue servitor empire designed to take care of organic species, and they are set up in such a way to be fantastic at doing that, with delegated functions and emotion emulators. Now we move on to humanity. In the Commonwealth of Man and the United Nations of Earth, they have a history that simply cannot be separated. Midway through the 21st century, there was a cultural shift on Earth. Humanity, it would seem, longed for the stars once more. A generation that had been born too late to explore Earth, but too soon to explore space, would leave their children and grandchildren a great gift. The 193 states making up the United Nations came together for the first time in decades and made a choice to attempt something truly wonderful. They were going to make spaceflight a possibility once more. Humanity would once again explore the stars. Thus began the Ulysses Initiative in the year 2048. The project would be to date the greatest undertaking by humanity. 6 wonderful arc ships were built in low Earth orbit over the next 50 years, and they would house 250,000 colonists each, men and women who volunteered to explore the stars. Alpha Centauri was the target destination. All 6 arc ships would travel together. The journey was estimated to take approximately 108 years, and as such the crews and colonists would be put into cryostasis for the duration. As you well know, my lords, those arc ships never made it to Alpha Centauri. It is not entirely clear what happened, but according to fragmented ship logs, we passed into the Oort cloud at the edge of our solar system, and it is here that we hit some sort of space-time anomaly, perhaps a wormhole, that would ever change our fate. This wormhole, if that is indeed what it was, spat us out into the system that we now call Deneb. Our ship carried the designation of Chrysanthemum, and you can still visit it at the Grand Archive orbiting Unity. The crew of the Chrysanthemum were awakened by the onboard ship's computer and managed to crash land on the moon of a large gas giant. Thus humanity had found its second home in Unity. The remaining 5 arc ships were nowhere to be seen, and the 250,000 colonists aboard the Chrysanthemum were alone. Or at least that's what we initially thought. The moon that humanity had been so abruptly forced upon was already occupied by an Iron Age reptilian race, who despite initial attempts to communicate with, were hostile, and their number estimated in the million. This species was undeniably aggressive. They swarmed the crashed ship, which miraculously had not suffered any hull breaches, thus providing our people the protection they sorely needed. It's very worthy to note that this was humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life. Never before had humanity come into contact with the alien, and this first contact would shape what the Commonwealth of Man would become. The aliens' inability to break into the hull of the ship allowed the crew to mount a sufficient military defense. The aliens were strong, but the airlocks to board the vessel provided fantastic choke points, and the aliens were large enough that realistically only 1 or 2 were able to climb into the portholes at any one time. It was therefore little challenge for the defense forces to hold them at bay. This incident would spark a decade of total war, slowly eroding humanity's once relatively curious egalitarian xenophilic traits into those of a xenophobic militarist. The aliens did not stop in their what would be pointless attacks and raids, and the colonists aboard the Chrysanthemum slowly expanded, initially fortifying a 2-kilometer square perimeter around the vessel before over the years pushing out over the entire moon, slowly purging the reptilian species who had once lived here. Within 20 Terran years, the sole sapient on the moon was human. On Earth, the fate of the 6 arc ships remained uncertain, but it was widely reported that all had been destroyed when they did not reappear from the Oort cloud at the edge of the solar system. What was supposed to be humanity's greatest achievement and represented a coming together between individual nation states quickly turned sour. The next 50 years of history for humans living on Earth would prove to be difficult indeed, but war was somehow avoided. The UN gradually began to regain support and slowly expanded until, by the end of the 22nd century, the international organization had become a de facto world government. The next 100 years or so were the absolute peak of human advancement. Space travel remained the ultimate goal, and the tragedy of the Ulysses Initiative was placed to one side. Throughout the 22nd century, humanity began to explore its own solar system, building observational posts and mining facilities over Mars, Venus, and a number of Jupiter's moons. Though there was some who resented the power the UN wielded, as evidenced by the Maturation Police Action of '88, few could deny the technological progression, and perhaps more importantly, humanity was beginning to view itself as just that, humanity, instead of individualistic nation-states. It had taken millennia, but humanity was finally about to put aside its differences and reach for a greater ideal. And so began the UNE's forays into space. Now we move on to the Chosen. The Chosen are fanatical purifiers who live in a star cluster just outside the galactic rim. The Chosen began as the Charanoy. In their home system, they discovered 3 perfect Gaea worlds, not of their own making, and convinced themselves that they had been singled out by the gods. This belief quickly twisted into entitlement. When they found other species living on these worlds, they enslaved and exterminated them, letting disease and cruelty finish the work. Over the centuries, this arrogance hardened into an ideology, and the Charanoy became the Chosen, fanatical purifiers convinced that all life beyond their own was a threat to their destiny. At the heart of their system lay a wormhole, a cosmic mystery they saw as a test. Not all of the Chosen would agree. There was one prophetess, Ithikaros. She foresaw that crossing the wormhole would bring only ruin. She attempted to destroy all research into the wormhole, built an ark, and led a breakaway group to a distant world called Opala. Here they tried to live in peace, and centuries passed. The main Chosen civilization fortified themselves in this cluster of systems and prepare for the day that they will spill out into the galaxy to begin a new holy purge. There are several enclaves that potter about the galaxy as well. These are not strictly empires as such, but they are relevant. The Curators are probably the most valuable. They are willing to sell secrets and provide researcher bonuses for a price, of course. The Artisans are the Curator's mirror, but for culture. They provide various services, most of which increase unity across an empire. There are 3 trader enclaves, Zuracorp, the Mutagan Merchant Guild, and the Riggan Commerce Exchange. They sell gas, crystals, and motes respectively, for a price of course, but they can be handy to get empires out of a bad situation. The Salvagers are an enclave dedicated to scrapping and repurposing ships or their materials. They can provide boosts to engineering research and offer scrapping services, allowing empires to scrap old ships for fresh alloy. The Shroud Walkers are an enclave dedicated to harnessing the power of the Shroud and spread across the galaxy, operating in their stations. The systems with these stations are connected via Shroud tunnels and are often protected by psionic avatars. The Shroud Walkers are an odd group indeed. We are aware that they offer services such as fate reading and intelligent insights on other empires. The Caravanners. These creatures roam the galaxy looking to peddle their wares upon us. They're mostly harmless and mostly sell junk, but once in a while a gem can be found. The Mind Wardens. The Mind Wardens are a civilization defined by their absolute rejection of the Shroud and all psionic influence. They see it only as corruption, intrusion, and danger. The Mind Wardens are born from a history of surviving a psychic plague. They developed the ancient ward to shield their people and have since built an entire society around resisting psionics. As an enclave, they will offer anti-psionic services, including raids on psionic people, thought policing, disposal of Zro, and even powerful Shroud seals which can suppress psionic auras, although this does put them directly at odds with the Shroud Walkers, with whom we believe they are effectively at war with. And the final item to touch on is the Fallen Empires. And we'll start with the Hive Fallen Empire. I'll begin with their complete history. We have suspected for years that the Fallen Empires that we know of once fought a mighty war in heaven, but before that preceded the rise of Zatanna, the synthetic queen. Records gathered from the Hive Mind Fallen Empire has confirmed just that. The key to this discovery is a system designated as Last Thought, and is situated at the centre of the three fragments: War, Control and Growth. My lords, I cannot find the words to explain what my initial impression was upon reviewing images of this system. It is a mess. Images and videos sent back from exploratory science vessels showed countless numbers of space fauna, from void worms to amoeba to Tiyanki. There was even an ether drake, a sky dragon, several Tiyanki matriarchs, and by shroud we even found what was reported to be the offspring of the toxic god. They were all just floating, aimlessly, some in circles, and it was not clear at this point if they were even alive. Our exploring science vessel had remained cloaked in system as to not draw the ire of the fragmented hive mind. However, to better scan the creatures, they decloaked, which proved a valuable choice, because on further examination of the space fauna, they appeared to be linked, or perhaps controlled is a better word, by one central overmind, the Primal mind. But this was separate from the three fragments. At the centre of this system there was a single hive world. Corpses orbited this world, but it was here that we identified ruins worth investigating. Dr. Fritsch reports on his discovery of this planet. The planet repels all who approach. A sense of dread built in my crew and I as we drew closer. My instincts screamed at me not to land on this world. It was bizarre. My officers and researchers invented excuses to delay their work, while instruments glitched and failed as if rejecting the data itself. Something happened here, something so horrific that its echoes still reverberate through reality. Our cautious survey of the planet led us deep underground, through endless layers of semi-fossilized biological matter. At last, we breached the planet's hollow core, only to find the oppressive atmosphere growing heavier with every step. Despite all of our precautions, the mounting unease proved unbearable. Several of my team succumbed to a collective breakdown, collapsing into a catatonia. They had to be evacuated back to the ship immediately. The vast cavern at the planet's heart was no ordinary void. Buried within, we found the remains of something far beyond the scale of any known life form. Faint traces of amniotic residue erased all doubt. This world was never a rock. It is an egg. And within it, a stillborn monster sleeps. It has taken several days, and I'm now pleased to report that we have yet to have been detected by the hive fragments. Now, with our research camp fully set up inside this once living creature, we have traced a network of strange tendrils embedded deep within the skull of the stillborn creature. Following these organic filaments to their source, we have uncovered an external array of synaptic clusters, an intricate system still thrumming with eerie potential. I've ordered that we attempt to interface with them, tapping into the ancient circuitry that pulses along the tendril's length. Whatever knowledge it holds has outlived its host. Whether it still remembers remains to be seen, but some of my team are pushing for caution. However, what this creature may know about our galaxy and its history is, in my opinion, worth the risk. We attempted to make connection and immediately found our thoughts were not our own. Knowledge flowed through us. It happened 100,000 years ago. Translating the hive's perception of time into galactic standard units was a delicate process, but sifting through the biocomputer's memories, we began to piece together the truth. At the height of its power, the hive faced an enemy it could not defeat. Though it stood with many allies, every battle ended in failure. Desperation bred recklessness. Much of what followed has been deliberately erased, but a scattered fragment remained, enough to glimpse their final gamble. The hive would forge this planet-sized egg as the vessel for their ascension, seeking to abandon their frail, planet-bound existence and merge with the hatchling. Whether they intended to fight or flee was unclear, but as the creature stirred, something went terribly wrong. It will take several more days to find out what exactly happened here, and we are continuing to push deeper into the stillborn's brain. By precisely interfacing with the surviving biocomputers and their still active synaptic link, we extracted the final memories from this creature. The process rapidly degraded the biocomputers under the immense cognitive strain, but we managed to salvage most of the data in time. Faced with annihilation, the Hive abandoned all caution and poured its entire psyche into this unborn host in a desperate bid for survival. The synaptic overload proved fatal, dooming the creature and trapping the Hive in a recursive loop of excruciating agony. It would have perished entirely had its most compassionate ally not severed the link. Now, only shattered echoes of its mind remain, lingering on this planet, a world haunted by its final scream. The last thought is agony. Not long after we left orbit and returned to our vessel, we received a communique from the Hive. Gone was the usual dissonance of the Fallen Empire fragments. The three voices harmonized, each one filled with rage. They spoke. Senseless humans, you have entered the last thought system. Let us be clear, this place is not for you. The consequences of this will be unimaginable. Your pain, unendurable. You will not disturb us. It. Me. Get out. My lords, this insight is truly remarkable. We have the date, 100,000 years ago. We know that around this time the galaxy witnessed the rise of Zatanna the Synthetic Queen. How do we know this? Because we found, identified and dated Zatanna's hidden cache on our homeworld to that time period, approximately 100,000 years ago. Earth and Unity were just primitive worlds. Humanity was still mastering stone and bone tools at this point, but there was a galactic war, the like of which has rarely been seen before, being fought above our heads. We know from the records that the Fallen Empires were active at this time, and they fought side by side against the Synthetic Queen. But they were losing. Badly. And clearly, this is now reinforced by the sheer insanity of the Hive's plan. Zatanna must have been punishing them heavily prior to their ascension attempt. Of course, had they held on and not pushed for this early ascension, they would have witnessed the rise of Zarqualan and the eventual defeat of Zatanna at the hands of the Animator of Clay, then her subsequent imprisonment. The most compassionate ally who saved them, perhaps, was the Xenophilic Fallen Empire, or perhaps the Caretakers. I would guess the Caretakers, as they have always shown somewhat benevolent tendencies. But this is remarkable insight, my lords. Remarkable indeed. But we shall leave the Hive's history behind for now, because we must research their current capabilities. I shall now detail for you the three fragments along with their individual goals, desires, infrastructure, and military capability. When the hive mind shattered, it broke into three separate fragments: growth, control, and war. They share a single species split between these fragments, the Rothak. Their individual species is very strong, quick learners, and traditional in nature, but it is important to note that they have not ascended at this point, i.e. they have not been through the process of genetic or cybernetic ascension. We also suspect that the hive is capable of assimilating organics into it, thus the species that we see may be fluid, changing throughout. We have monitored first contact with the hive and several other FTL-capable empires, and we witness different outcomes depending on which of the three fragments is first to reach out. Instead of a calm and ordered exchange, we witnessed an assault by three separate signals. Each vastly different in content, they speak with the same voice. Generally, the voices quickly descend into a garbled mess, but analysis reveals that within each signal is a complex designation. We have pulled 6 opening lines, 2 from each of the fragments, and War has the following to say. Weak creatures. How would you war, we wonder? To watch your struggle, to hear your chatter. We would be entertained. You have useless shields. Not even able to withstand the heart of a star, this galaxy must terrify you. Now we hear from growth, abundant life, and well fed. Do you grow out of necessity or because you choose to? We can't remember. Not enough orifices. With a tertiary mouth, you may be able to see some gains. And finally, control. Such bodies. Your eyes are 3% off center. This must be corrected. We will assume your compliance. You have painfully inefficient language. Archaic grammar must be rationalized. You will apply our changes. Clearly, the hive is not in a good state. So let's cover the fragments in detail, starting with growth. The desire for evolution and change from the fallen hive. Growth is the desire for evolution and change. It's so focused on reinventing itself constantly that the fragment has a hard time establishing control over the other two. Growth occupies 3 systems containing 4 planets. Hive worlds to be specific: Slumbering Creche, Dormant Nursery, Abient Nidus, and Dozing Tiller. The first 2 worlds appear to have a population growth focus. They are loaded with bioregeneration institutes, the pinnacle of the galaxy's medical research technology, and will almost certainly help to keep their drones alive and healthy for longer. The second 2 worlds, Nidus and Tiller, are focused on colossal food production. This fragment has a lot of mouths to feed after all. Control is the obsessional instinct to depress deviancy and promote uniformity. It wants to control the other fragments more than anything else, but the constant chaos inherent to our universe is a constant distraction for it. Control occupies 3 planets across 3 systems: Harvester 1, Harvester 2, and Harvester 713. As one may expect by the name, their planets are much better organised than Growth's, with more of a research-orientated focus. What is most exciting about Control systems is that they appear to have replicated the feat of the Stellaris, but they went one step further. They have, through means unknown, moved 8 planets into an equidistant orbit around their system's star, a truly incredible feat of stellar engineering. For those unaware, the Stellaris were a fanatical pacifistic race who were central to the start of the War in Heaven, but that's covered in another report. War is next. It is aggressive and warlike, as one would expect, and it contains what used to be many impulses within the hive. Now it attempts to establish control over the other 2 fragments, when it is not fighting itself. War has only 2 planets, again over 3 systems: Redoubt and Chance of Glory, but most notably, War also has within its borders 5 deep space citadels, fully upgraded. These are colossal defensive bastions, capable of immense destructive output, a difficult system should anyone be foolish enough to attack them. War's planets are also resource focused and covered with bastions housing tens of thousands of ground forces ready to defend the planet. Interestingly, War is in control of all the ground forces for the entire hive, but not the military fleets. Each hive has their own fleet, and furthermore, all 3 fragments appear intent on producing hordes of xenomorphs. At least they agree on something. Finally, War also contains within its borders a ruined interstellar assembly, which orbits several shattered planets, so one would assume that Zatanna tore into this system. Why the assembly ended up in War's domain is unknown, but interesting nevertheless. Each fragment has general opinions on the other Empire species. War sees pacifists as lazy and militarists as healthy for the galaxy. Control views egalitarians as foolish and authoritarians as wise. And Growth cares little for ethics, but despises genocidal empires, for they are blind murderers. Now on to the tasks. We have identified that similar to the other fallen empires, although far more erratically, the hive fragments will make requests of other empires. The theme of these requests vary with fragment, and refusing them will often result in punishment. Starting with Growth's tasks. Ecosystem upgrade. We watched as Growth attempted to modify or terraform a planet. An occupied one, forcibly. It's unclear what the repercussions of this will be, so we watched and waited, and it was remarkable indeed. Planet-wide, local insects now communicated using the same frequencies as the aliens' wireless devices. A single chirp was able to operate an automatic door, and a swarm could incapacitate a factory. The aliens attempted to adapt by switching frequencies, but not all facilities were able to be returned to full efficiency. But it soon got worse for them. Planet-wide, creatures once content with grazing and mud baths now confronted the aliens with unsettling questions about existence. It appears that the fallen empire tampered with large swathes of the world's fauna. And that wasn't the end. The world soon began to shine, literally. The modifications somehow provided the world's varied species with a bioluminescence and an incessant hum like that of a running engine. This planet will no longer have a true day and night life cycle, and its effects will be profound. So it would appear that growth enjoys messing with other empires' planets, but that is not all. We have seen two examples of them forcibly involving themselves with a species' genetics, their entertainment. Firstly, they'll point out that your species is boring and simple, and they'll ask you to spice up your gene pool or be punished. Conversely, if they find a species they'll like, they'll ask for a piece of it. Literally, a hand or a foot, even a leg. Refuse and face judgment. War's tasks are thankfully more simple. War will demand that we should go to war with other species for its entertainment. If an empire is not going to war regularly enough, it will force them into it by sending experimental ships to test their defences. Control is far more involved than the other two fragments and far more demanding. It makes demands upon you that you must surrender your population to it. And it will also make demands of the Galcom, supporting or demanding a piece of legislation be allowed to pass. It will also go as far to demand that you vacate systems as to tidy up your empire's borders. If it wasn't real, it would almost be funny. My lords, now we shall address what can occur should one of these fragments wake up. This can occur in a number of different ways. Each of the fragments can wake up and assume control over the other two. There will be an internal conflict over this, but eventually one fragment will consume the other two. If war assumes control, it will make demands upon the galaxy. War will demand that the galaxy's civilizations rival one another and fight for its amusement. It will reward spirited engagements and also wishes to fight other empires as well. If control subsumes the other two fragments, its authoritarian streak will come out to play. It will attempt to assume control of the Galcom, and should another member of the Galcom choose to veto this, it will immediately appeal it, and be rather angry indeed. Both of these fragments will operate as a de facto awakened empire, and they will participate should a war in heaven occur. Growth, however, well, growth is far more terrifying, for if growth assumes total control, it will mutate into a devouring swarm. Growth will seek to wipe out galactic life and replace it with what it deems to be the perfect life form, itself. Ironic considering it also hates genocidal empires. Growth is clearly the most dangerous of the three, but it has all of the capabilities of an awakened empire, but with the added genocidal bonuses of a devouring swarm. If this happens, rally the fleets, because by Shroud, you're going to need them. That segues me nicely onto the Hive's military capabilities, namely their fleets of bioships. War will start with 160 Maulers and 36 Weavers. Their Weavers are all in an attrition configuration, meaning that they are designed to inflict devastating negative effects on enemy fleets. Specifically, they are set up to reduce enemy ship weapons fire rate, range and tracking, and they are also designed to decrease evasion and sublight speed of the enemy ships. Their offensive weapons are entirely kinetic. The Maulers will come equipped with mandibles designed to chew through enemy ships, and also some more kinetic weapon equivalents. Armour is undoubtedly the best defense against these bioweapons, or shield hardening and sufficient shields. I stress that shields alone will be near useless. Hardening is the key here. To defeat them, use energy weapons. Bioships have no shields of any kind, but they do have stacks of armor and armor hardeners. For that reason, use lasers or plasma to defeat these monsters. War also uniquely has deep space citadels in their borders. These colossal space stations can take an awful lot of punishment and dish it right back at you. I would suggest using torpedoes to bring these down quickly. Growth has recovery class weavers. These are designed to increase the effectiveness of their own ships. They will increase speed and evasion chance, as well as increasing armor regeneration, effectiveness, and resistance. Growth also has access to a fleet of harbingers. They are equipped with neutron launcher equivalents and strikecraft. My advice for these is the same as before. Either use massive quantities of armor or use shields with hardening. In this case, you may find fully hardened shields to be more effective, given that neutron equivalents perform very poorly against shields. Controllers next. They use exclusively weavers, mostly in a fatigue configuration. These are remarkable. They are set up alongside disruptor equivalents and a new weapon called the Havoc Storm. This will confuse enemy ships for 5 to 10 days, taking them out of combat. These weavers are supported by others which run swarmer missiles and wave makers. Wave makers drastically increase the ship fire rates, weapon ranges, and weapon penetration. Using these with the disruptor fatigue configuration is extremely dangerous. I should also note that I've witnessed the growth fragment build not 1 or 2, but 3 Colossus superweapons, the Worldcracker variants. Growth does not mess about. To defeat the High Fallen Empire, I would strongly suggest using a similar approach that one would use to defeat the Pythorian Scourge. Energy weapons will be key here. With enough research, focused arc emitters will always come out on top due to their penetration properties. But before you have access to them, I would recommend heavy use of laser and/or plasma technologies. You must burn this organic fleet with fire. My lords, it is worth noting that regardless which of the 3 splinters assumes control, they will gain command of all of the fragments fleets, as well as the vast array of space fauna occupying the Last Thought system. Remember that this includes an Ether Drake, a Sky Dragon, and a Toxic God entity, not to mention a number of matriarchs. This will give them an incredible jumpstart with which to begin their growth into the galaxy. To close, my lords, I was going to touch on the Hive's ascension path, as unlike all of the other fallen empires, they do not appear to have ever ascended, psionically, genetically, or cybernetically. I had assumed that upon awakening, the Hive would seek to ascend genetically. Alas, this is not the case. Perhaps it will learn how to do this in the future. Moving on to the Holy Guardians. The Holy Guardians embody the nature and meaning of spiritualism in Stellaris, and this is built on several fundamentals. The first thing that they believe is that consciousness begets reality, and I'll explain that statement further in a second, but they go on to state that we regard with patience the childlike efforts of those who delude themselves it is the other way around, as they play with their blocks of hard matter. So let's explore that statement. Consciousness begets reality, and here is what I think it means. Imagine you have a toy in front of you, but you can't see it. The toy is sitting there, waiting for you to look at it, and when you finally look at it, you can see it clearly. Now what if I told you that according to the Holy Guardians, the toy is not truly there until you look at it? They believe that just by looking at something, your mind helps decide what it looks like, or even if it exists at all. This idea suggests that your mind, your very consciousness, helps shape what you see, and therefore how you experience the world around you. So when the Guardians say consciousness begets reality, they might mean that your awareness or thoughts could influence how the world works, or even make things real in the way that you experience them. Essentially, nothing is real until consciousness perceives it, and harks back to the old fable of if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Conversely, a materialist may say the following, that matter exists first, i.e., the universe has existed long before consciousness ever emerged. Stars, planets, galaxies, they all formed billions of years ago, before life appeared, so reality does not depend at all on consciousness to exist. And to use an Earth-based example, the moon is there, even if you don't look at it. One of Earth's most famous scientists, Albert Einstein, famously criticised this idea that reality depends on observation by asking a simple question: do you really believe the moon isn't there when you're not looking at it? A materialist would say reality is objective and exists whether or not anyone is aware of it. So these are interesting perspectives indeed, but they help shape the mind of the fanatic spiritualist, and as such, the Holy Guardians. The next thing to touch on is the next fundamental principle of the Holy Guardians' spiritualism, and that is, although they have what would be called religious figures, i.e. Zarqualan, who we'll touch on later, and they also appear to have holy sites, i.e. their consecrated worlds, the Holy Guardians don't appear to worship a specific god or a specific deity. Rather than focusing their spiritualism on a pantheon of gods or a single deity, they appear to worship the divinity of life itself. They do appear to have a rather keen divinity for organic and/or natural life. The Holy Guardians, and I cannot overstate this, despise robotic and synthetic life. There are recordings of the messaging empires who dabble in artificial intelligence. I have several recordings for you. The first one reads, "We have observed your fumbling attempts at creating artificial intelligence, and we have come to the conclusion that you are headed down the path of spiritual self-destruction. Abandon this foolish endeavour at once, or we will make you." Indeed, we have also witnessed them send another transmission to an organic empire who did manage to ascend synthetically from organic life into mechanical bodies, and the message they sent reads, "That yours was a depraved species was not unknown to us, but your latest act of insanity has surpassed even our darkest fears. Making imperfect copies of your brain and plugging them into mobile synthetic containers is not the same as transferring your essence into a new body. For such a thing cannot be done. Your souls are lost forever. Do you even realize the enormity of your mistake, destroying the bodies that you were gifted at birth with nothing less than the collective suicide of your entire species? There is truly no hope for you now." If I may, I'll explore this divinity for natural life, or the dislike of robotic life, a little bit more. For me, it's not crazy that spiritualists hate synthetic life. For one, they, I assume, would believe in the fundamentals of a soul, something that they say they can touch or feel psionically. I can believe that by ascending synthetically, one would lose that part of themselves. And I can also get on board with the argument that synthetic life usurps the divine or the natural order of things, i.e. the idea that there is a sanctity of life in something organic and natural. Whether you believe that or not is frankly irrelevant, but the point is, I can understand why someone who thinks that's true would therefore dislike synthetic and robotic life. Machines, particularly sentient ones, may therefore be seen as unnatural abominations that disrupt this order. And furthermore, if a spiritualist believes that creation is the domain of a god or a higher power, then by building an artificial being in their own image could also be seen as playing God, or an act of arrogance or hubris. And finally, there is the aspect that if we use machines to replace our need to work, then that somewhat removes our purpose and our reason to be. I can understand some of the points that I've just made, and I can certainly accept to a fanatic spiritualist that some of those points would apply. However, I struggle with the differentiation. What is the difference between a non-sentient robot who works in a mine or on a farm to produce a basic resource or food or whatever it might be, which, remember, the Holy Guardians find abhorrent, and, for example, a transportation vehicle or a dishwasher or even a spaceship? I feel like this is where treading the line of logic turns into a full cult-like opinion, and I guess, fundamentally, that's why they're fanatics. We've spent some time talking about spiritualism and fanatic spiritualism in our galaxy, but to move on to the Guardians themselves. The Holy Guardians occupy 6 planets, but 4 appear to be mostly abandoned outposts. They have 2 main planets, Celestial Throne and Sky Temple. Celestial Throne is their capital planet, It is most interesting that it is entirely self-sufficient and has absolutely no resource deficits. The same cannot be said for most planets, for most empires. Interestingly, they also have no generator districts. Instead, they rely on a single Class 4 singularity to produce enough energy for the entire planet. Other noteworthy buildings on their capital include the Celestial Cathedral. This apparently uses metaphysical technologies to allow the amplification of psionic sermons for spiritual resonance. The immense complex enables their worshippers to intimately connect to the Divine's essence at a system-wide range. Their second planet, the Sky Temple, is much the same, but they do appear to have a more factory focus on this world. The planet contains 2 autoforges. These are expensive nano-replication bays, and they're able to transform raw material into advanced alloys with marvellous efficiency. This planet is powered by 3 Class 4 singularities, and also, unlike their capital, it has a building called the Phased Imperium Shrine. This is apparently used exclusively for communing with the spirits of the Shroud, and this temple manifests itself only partially in our dimension. I would very much like to see this, but I will also come back to Spirits of the Shroud later in this report. Further to this, the Holy Guardians have 4 uncolonized and unclaimed Gaea worlds, situated near but just outside of their territory. These are named Pristine Jewel, Emerald Mausoleum, Walled Garden, and Prophet's Retreat. Woe befall any empire who lands on these planets without prior permission. The Guardians are incredibly protective and overzealous. They've been known to wipe out entire civilizations for trespassing on their sacred worlds. We believe that these worlds are essentially colossal graveyards for fallen soldiers. They are, if you like, planet-sized memorial sites for lives lost, and there is even a marker that suggests that these planets are holy worlds. Any empires settling these worlds will suffer the wrath of the Holy Guardians, but most interestingly, if another spiritualistic empire chooses to consecrate them, they will gain massive favour with the Guardians. Clearly, despite being fallen, they are still paying attention. The Guardians themselves consist of a single species. They do not use servants or slaves of any kind, which, I should point out, makes them very different to the other fallen empires, who all either use robotic slaves or organic slaves. All of their citizens are incredibly powerful psionics, capable of communication with the Shroud, and no doubt hold other potent psionic abilities. The Guardians are also ingenious, strong, nomadic, and communal, and they're quite used to living in close proximity to one another, despite the vast living space that they occupy. They have, as one might expect, a vast battle fleet made up of escorts, battle cruisers, the occasional Titan, and even a colossal planet-killing superweapon, which I'll come onto in a minute. Their ships favour energy weapons. Their battle cruisers run 2 arc emitters, 4 neutron torpedoes, 2 devastator torpedoes, and 4 banks of plasma cannons. As you would expect, they have access to an array of psionic technology, namely the psionic jump drive, which allows them to harness the psionic potential of the ship's crew to warp local space-time, eliminating the distance between point of origin and destination. It is incredibly powerful, far more so than the technological variant of the jump drive. And rather than using an artificial intelligence to pilot their ship, they use something called a precognitive interface. This is still a computer, but it's a sort of psionic computer that is capable of reading and analysing the impulses of telepathic operatives before they've even been cognitively processed themselves. We're not quite sure how this works. The final piece of psionic tech they have access to is the psionic shield. This requires Zroh to power and has significant defensive protection, even greater than that of a dark matter shield. Their escorts, as you would expect, are equipped for a close-range assault. They also have 3 banks of devastator torpedoes, 4 plasma cannons, and an array of point defense, and they are equally defended with psionic shielding. If I was foolish enough to find myself in a war with the Holy Guardians, I would recommend using adequate shielding and shield hardening, as this will offer the best defense against their energy-based weaponry and their torpedoes, although I will stress that shield hardening will be particularly important when fighting them. Like the other fallen empires, the Holy Guardians have access to a planet-killing weapon, although this one is called the Divine Enforcer, and it does not merely shield a world, it doesn't even crack it. It is, in my opinion, far worse. Through some unknown manner, it converts the entire planet's population to the Guardians' belief system. Individuals who for one moment could have entirely opposite ethics can be manipulated and changed within the time it takes to fire the device. It is an extremely distressing thought. Any mechanical beings, be that synthetic or robotic, and even a Gestalt hive mind drone, will instantly be killed. And this weapon also has an after effect. The planet will receive, through means not understood, spiritualist ethic attraction for a decade, meaning it is almost impossible to deprogram your population's belief system during this time. If this is used on a machine world, then the result will simply break the planet. It is incredibly destructive. Something that I found interesting when researching the Holy Guardians, my lords, is that they are not currently pacted with a Shroud entity, nor is there any indication that they ever were. This is of course speculative, but I wonder, did the Holy Guardians for whatever reason just simply never make a pact with the Shroud entity, or did they make a pact and then break it? Espionage has told us that they are not currently in contact with the Shroud at all at the moment, so essentially, why? Why is this the case? What happened to them? Or did they just never establish contact with one of the Shroud gods? This feels incredibly unlikely, but I guess unless we ask them, we're never going to find out. The Holy Guardians, like all fanatics, are unusual. And frankly, fanatic spiritualists are often levels above unusual. I've not yet touched on Zarqualan, so I will now, but I'll go on to make the point that how can an empire that's so technologically advanced still revere a dead alien's head, to the point that pilgrims will come from their empire to fight for you, just for holding the head? It makes no sense, but hey ho. We know that Zarqualan was not of the Holy Guardians, he is far older. Zarqualan was involved in the downfall and eventual imprisonment of the synthetic queen Satana. I've discussed Satana elsewhere, and you can find out about her in the library records if you wish, but Zarqualan through this action became somewhat of a religious prophet for the Holy Guardians, who were also involved in the imprisonment of Satana. Circling back, it is interesting that Zarqualan made a deal with the Animator of Clay, a Shroud god, and yet the Holy Guardians did not. There is further evidence for spiritualistic folly. Upon discovering Zarqualan's tomb, you actually find out that he did not wish to be worshipped or followed as some sort of prophet at all. He goes as far to call out foolish species and empires who worship him so. Spiritualists are amusing indeed. And now the Xenophilic Fallen Empire. The Xenophiles are an odd empire which becomes apparent as soon as you start to communicate with them. We've picked up 3 of the following messages from the Xenophiles. They read: "All the world's a stage, and all the humans are merely players. You are a player, are you not? Don't break the fourth wall, you clever child you. You have ceased to amuse. Your little game will soon be over." These communications imply that they, the Xenophiles, are merely observers, like their name suggests, very happy to sit back and watch the events of the galaxy unfold. They, like the other fallen empires, are not active on the galactic stage, though they will occasionally reach out to younger empires and make demands of them. The most noteworthy requests are demanding colony ships full of people, for them to store in their organic collections, but more on that shortly. They will also request any and all brain scans that one may acquire, i.e. in the event that we've codenamed Limbo, where we acquired the brain scan of a long-dead alien race. We have also noticed that the Xenophiles can demand an empire outlaw any and all purges, ongoing and/or in the future. And finally, perhaps unsurprisingly, they also tend to dislike empires who harm the majestic Tiyanki space whales. The Xenophiles themselves are a single species. They occupy 3 core worlds, all of which orbit a gas giant named Skyfather. The worlds in question are Cradle, Mother and Brother, But there is also a fourth, sister, which has been shattered. Perhaps it is a remnant of the War in Heaven. Within their space, although not in their core system, they hold a border world called the Preserve. It is here on the Preserve that the observers see fit to house random species across the galaxy, but I should note that unlike the Caretakers, these fully sapient organics are not in cryostasis. They are, rather, in the equivalent of what we would call a zoo. These sentient organics are locked in. Although they live on a Gaea world, their habitat is effectively a paradise, they are nevertheless imprisoned there. We assume that the xenophiles gain some sort of happiness, or perhaps society research bonuses from doing this. Whether these creatures are pampered or left to their own devices is unclear. But should we, or any other empire, surrender our population to them, it is here that they will end up. The last thing I'll note about this system is that I wonder what would happen should these people ever get liberated. Would they try and return home, as it's highly likely that some of them will be descendants of empires who fell millennia ago. The Observers, unlike some of the other fallen empires, do not use organic slaves, but they do enslave machines, and it doesn't appear just any regular machine, but a fully fledged sentient one. Remember at the start of this report I said that they were somewhat benevolent? Well, enslaving sapient robots and putting organics in zoos, it's not great. But in fairness, our galaxy can get a lot worse. Anyway, the robots they enslave are indentured servants forced to work domestic protocol jobs, which is essentially serving their respective overlords. Despite the mechanical servants, the Observers appear to be keen biologists. Although they have not genetically ascended, they do appear to have left their genetic template untouched. But what they have done is develop a cohort of genetically enhanced super soldiers, who are likely extremely capable of immense destruction should they be unleashed upon the galaxy. The xenophiles also have a tendency to produce a unit or two of xenomorphs, perhaps for observation, or maybe it's just about sending a message to the rest of the galaxy. The Observers, as we know, do like to meddle in galactic affairs, and we have attributed at least 2 systems, well outside their borders, to the Observers. However, one may actually be a work of another entity entirely. But the first is the system known as Sanctuary. Sanctuary contains an abandoned ring world. It appears that it was originally created to act as a nature preserve and house primitive life. The system was abandoned but left guarded by an automated defensive system. Upon discovering the system, we were contacted by the AI controlling the system's defences. It effectively warned us from approaching, but once we had deactivated the defences, we found 4 functioning ring segments, each housing a different primitive alien species. This has all of the hallmarks of the xenophiles' organic alien zoos on the Preserve. Why they left these civilizations to suffer the whims of the galaxy is not clear. The second system that we initially had attributed to the Observers was the Wenkwart system. The Wenkwart system was similar to Sanctuary in that it was once owned by a clearly somewhat benevolent empire once upon a time, but we found it abandoned. Wenkwart is a Gaea world which once operated as a sort of planetary garden. It is incredibly beautiful, perhaps the most beautiful place we have ever witnessed. The Wenkwart system, like Sanctuary, had a few automated defense stations, and upon landing on the planet we were contacted by a robotic custodian, who effectively gave us a choice: either treat the planet with respect and do not industrialize it, or fight. We later found out from this same drone that Wenkwart was originally created by the Auron Empire, an empire who we have absolutely no record of whatsoever, something to look into in the future perhaps. But now let's move on to the xenophile naval battle fleets. Their battle fleet is made up of a mix of Riddle escorts and Enigma battle cruisers. They use fairly mixed designs, but slightly favour shield for defence, using shield hardening technologies on top of the already abundant dark matter shield arrays. Offensively, the xenophiles slightly favour kinetic weapons, tending to opt for gigacannons over the other available X-slot weapons, and they also use kinetic batteries where available. Despite the kinetic tendency, the ships also come equipped with numerous strike-craft bays, which complement the kinetic weapons quite nicely, making it difficult to construct a specialised defence. Their navy is remarkably well balanced, it's very capable, and potentially very dangerous. To defeat the ships in combat, you will require vessels with a mix of shield and armour, perhaps a tendency towards armour here, as you will offset more of the damage potential from the kinetics, and since strikecraft will bypass shields anyway, armour will be more effective. But remember, it is a little more expensive. Offensively, I'd recommend using disruptors. Disruptors remain incredibly powerful due to their penetration qualities. I ran some numbers using a Xenophile battlecruiser. Despite the battlecruiser running 30% shield hardening, due to the hull armour shield ratio, disruptors will still completely annihilate a battlecruiser approximately 47% faster than a gamma laser, and 40% faster than a Gauss cannon. This is largely due to the sheer quantity of armour that the other two guns must chew through before they can access the vulnerable hull of the ship. Furthermore, consider that when inflicting damage on the hull of a warship, it is more likely to bug out, i.e. emergency jump to FTL. Thus disruptors become even more fantastic. Without going off too much on a tangent, again using the Xenophile battlecruiser as an example, it would have to run at approximately 60% shield hardening before you'd be better off equipping your ship with Gauss cannons and/or gamma lasers. It is remarkable indeed. The summary of all that is, use disruptors where possible, and remember that this includes focused arc emitters. The final note regarding the Xenophile ships is that they have access to a Colossus superweapon. Theirs is not quite as brutal as the Xenophobes' Worldcracker. The Xenophiles have what's called a global pacifier. It is the device capable of locking planets behind an unbreakable shield, a terrible punishment for any empire who stands against them. Incidentally, we believe that it may have been the Xenophiles who locked the genocidal Preaky lizards behind a shield on Gish, a fantastic example of galactic pruning in action. That covers the Xenophiles nicely, and now I'll move on to the second, somewhat benevolent fallen empire, the Keepers of Knowledge, the fanatic materialists. The Keepers are a race who were once organic like us, but in their own words, ascended to merge with the machine and become cybernetic beings. I find it very telling indeed that the Keepers, despite being fanatic materialists, never went down the route of fully synthetic life. Perhaps they were aware of the potential dangers that synthetic life may bring upon the galaxy. It is a dangerous technology after all. We have intercepted the following messages sent from the Keepers, and all share a similar theme. They read, "You don't know what forces you're toying with, arrogant ones." We have seen civilizations destroy themselves over and over by delving into matters they were not meant to know. Such is the folly of youth. Knowledge without understanding is dangerous. Unlike knowledge, however, understanding cannot always be taught. For your own good, and for the good of the galaxy, we will crush your defences, burn your books, and wipe your data drives. Clearly the Keepers wish to limit galactic knowledge, and furthermore, the only request that we have ever seen the Keepers make of other empires is that their top scientists be sent to join them. Specifically, the Keepers sent the following message. "We understand that your empire is home to an individual whose brilliant mind transcends the tragic primitiveness of your species. While the talents of your head of research are sadly wasted, we, the Keepers of Knowledge, always have use for skilled scientists to work within our archives. As such, we are offering you a unique chance to earn our favour by allowing us to take charge of them. We already have a ship en route to pick them up, so you need only say yes, and everything will be settled. I'm sure you do not wish to disappoint us, do you?" This message drips with condescension, and in my personal opinion, it is firmly that the Keepers specifically request an empire's best and brightest, not because they have some great need of them, but because taking them will almost certainly stifle said empire's technological progression. Indeed, to further support this theory, should an empire go down the route of cosmogenesis and make it as far as the applied infinity thesis technology, the Keepers will demand they drastically cut their technological research or threaten them with war. Given the consequences of applied infinity thesis, in this specific case, maybe it's not a terrible thing. The Keepers occupy an EQ monopolis named the Font of Knowledge and a Gaea world, the Archives. The Archives, interestingly, is protected by a deep space citadel, a space station capable of outputting a wonderful amount of offensive damage on any foe who would seek to threaten this system. I also note that I find it interesting that the Archives is not an EQ monopolis like the Font of Knowledge. Perhaps this represents the cost of encasing a world to a civilization, even one such as mighty as the Keepers. Or perhaps they simply wish to keep the Archives as a beautiful Gaea world. Furthermore, the Archive has, without doubt, one of the best research facilities, if not the best in the entire galaxy. This repository houses knowledge from multiple galactic ages. Although it's not clear if the Fallen Empire still knows how it works, we would absolutely like to get our hands upon it. The history of the galaxy held here would be vast and wonderful to explore. The Keepers, as mentioned, at some point ascended to embrace cybernetics, having previously been solely organic. It's not entirely clear why they chose cybernetics and not synthetics, but I would suggest perhaps it's a telltale sign of their struggles against Zatanna, as she was a being that once ascended to become a synthetic. Ultimately, we don't know, but the Keepers, similar to the Observers, also have artificial servants, robots, in a 1-to-1 ratio, i.e. one slave per person. And these robot slaves are also indentured servants, forced to work domestic protocol jobs and essentially serve their overlords. Unlike the Observers, the Keepers use robotic soldiers, hunter-killer machines to be precise. We suspect that these are highly effective killing machines, not subject to any morality and totally compliant to the will of the Keepers. The fleets of the Keepers of Knowledge are, in my opinion, significantly better laid out than that of the Observers, mostly because they use entirely energy-based weaponry and/or strikecraft, thus their weapons somewhat complement each other. But they do have their problems as well. The Keepers, on all of their vessels, from Titan to Escort, have them equipped with disruptors, which we've established are one of the best available weapons throughout the whole galaxy. Their X-slots on the battlecruisers are fitted with tachyon lancers, which can be absolutely brutal against well-armoured opponents. The key weakness that these ships have in their design is their lack of overall range. Plasma cannons have a range of 45 to 80 galactic units. This is a medium-range weapon. Disruptors, on the other hand, can fire between 0 and 40 galactic units. Thus, there is never a moment when all of this ship's weapons can fire at the same time. That, in my eyes, is a big problem. Furthermore, their only somewhat long-range weapon is their X-slot weapon, the Tachyon Lance, which, if the battlecruisers choose to sit at extreme range and fire it, does limit their overall offensive capability, as their remaining weapons will not be able to fire. In some ways, their ships are balanced, because despite them not being able to fire their weapons all at once, they do have weapons that can deal with fast-moving smaller ships, i.e. the disruptors. The Plasma can deal with the mid-range threats, and the Tachyon Lance can deal with the extreme-range threats, but they would greatly suffer against a monoform fleet, which will hit them at only one specific range. An example of this would be a swarm of frigates or corvettes. If you were to find yourself in a combat situation with the Keepers of Knowledge, I would strongly suggest using a monoform fleet. Corvettes, in my opinion, would be perfect, as it will nullify most of the Keepers' weapons. The alternative to this could be using battleships with long-range weapons, such as whirlwind missiles and focused arc emitters. Having the battleships engage at maximum range will keep them out of the plasma cannon range of the fallen fleet. Thus, you'll make quick work of them. Finally to note, the Keepers have a planet-killing weapon that appears to be the same design as the Observers. It will lock the target world forever behind a shield. Fittingly brutal. And now, the xenophobic Fallen Empire. I'll begin with the Xenophobes' current holdings. The Xenophobes, like the other Fallen Empires, occupy a small cluster of systems with approximately 6 planets inhabited. However, of the 6, only 2 are fully populated, with the other 4 containing nothing remotely regarding any production capability. They appear to just be colonies for housing population who for whatever reason don't wish to live inside their core systems. The 2 heavily populated and industrialized planets are called the Core and the Boundary, although technically the Boundary is a moon that orbits the Core. These worlds are populated by both the xenophobic population and their nerve-stapled slaves. They appear to only have positive genetic traits, alluding to some sort of genetic modification technique. Furthermore, the number of nerve-stapled slaves matches perfectly the number of xenophobes, perhaps suggesting there is a 1-to-1 slave per person arrangement. The fact that they're nerve-stapled removes any sort of implication for rebellion. Both their planets are largely similar. The Core holds on it 3 Aegis complexes. These are monumental planetary defense complexes designed to hold numerous planetary defense forces ready to defend the planet. 1 affluence center, a building designed to produce consumer goods at the cost of minerals. A nourishment center, which can feed the entire planet. A dimensional fabricator, which is a building that opens a doorway to the fabric of dimensional space and extracts rare resources. 2 Class 4 singularities, these produce copious amounts of energy. A ziggurat of justice, which appears to be the zenith of legal institution, perhaps suggesting that they still suffer with crime even after all these years. And finally, 2 autoforges, buildings that are expansive nano-replicators that transform raw material into advanced alloy. Both their planets are heavily defended, with the Core being the slightly stronger of the 2. Should we wish to conquer these worlds, we will need an ungodly number of warriors to do so. The fleets. Next we move on to the xenophobes' naval capabilities. While fallen, they appear to only have a relatively small battle fleet. It is, however, incredibly well armed and led by the most fearsome of admirals. The xenophobes have a tendency to outfit their battleships with kinetic weaponry. They use exclusively kinetic batteries, mega cannons, Gauss cannons, and on their larger vessels, hangar bays. They protect these vessels with an even mix of armor and shields. If we wish to efficiently fight these ships, I would suggest outfitting our own vessels with significant armor, and forgoing shielding altogether. A mix of both energy and kinetic weapons would be best to deal with their protective, balanced setup. I'd also note that they are by far the most aggressive of the 5 fallen empires. We have witnessed many empires attempt to colonize systems that border them, only to be utterly annihilated in retaliation for even attempt to expand near them, despite there clearly not being a threat. Now we'll move on to some of the less obvious details regarding the xenophobes, and we shall start with Admiral Tuberek, an admiral who is left to die by his own people. Dr. Foster will detail the report on how we found Tuberek. During a recent survey of a previously undiscovered system in what we believe used to be military isolationist territory, we discovered a shielded world. All attempts by our science team to penetrate the barrier with our sensors have failed. The scanning beam is simply deflected back at the ship as though we were looking at a mirror. The barrier's energy readings fluctuate somewhat, possibly as a result of thousands of years of decay, but breaching it with raw firepower would still be impossible. My team and I have proposed a special project to investigate ways of removing the barrier, but we wonder if it is created to keep something in rather than out. Our experience with these shields has often been poor. In a previous report we encountered a genocidal race of lizards known as the Priki. That did not end well for anyone. Nevertheless, we shall attempt to bring the shield down. After many months, we have managed to lower the energy barrier that surrounded the planet. Our scientists found what was an indistinct but habitable world, devoid of civilization. There was one notable exception. A small, isolated hut was found perched upon a Mi'iza in the planet's northern hemisphere. Within the hut we found an old alien, who demanded to speak to our government. The alien stated, "You cannot imagine how good it is to finally see clear sky again. I am Grand Admiral Tuberek, former master of the combined armada and victor of 100 battles. I personally oversaw the conquest of the Juthbajak, Rikinak, Bilnark, and Juskari, empires hundreds of your years old. As my saviour, I pledge my service to you. I should be honoured to lead your mighty fleets into battle against your enemies. We queried with the Admiral why he was marooned on the planet, to which he stated, "Without my leadership skills, we would just be another extinct forgotten species. I crushed the fleets of all who opposed us and put a dozen worlds to the torch, all to preserve the future of my kind. Yet this was my reward. When peace finally arrived and we sought treaties with those we had defeated, my presence became an embarrassment. I became a symbol of cruelty, and for my so-called war crime I was imprisoned alone on this world. They lacked the courage to execute me. When I was abandoned, they explained that time would pass more slowly on the inside of the barrier. For me, some 40 of your years have passed, while the rest of the universe, untold centuries, must have come and gone." Tubarek, as expected, is a fantastic admiral. He tends to follow aggressive tactics, demanding to be the tip of the spear. He is obsessive and has a singular purpose, to the point where he will always take an advantage when offered, even if it puts him and his ship at risk. All things considered, he is extremely capable. Next, my lords, we shall discuss the destruction of Shalash. Shalash was once home to a wonderful society who reached levels of terraforming technology hitherto unmatched. They were, for reasons not entirely clear to us, utterly annihilated. No quarter was given, and a genocide rarely witnessed befell this empire. It was, we believe, conducted on behalf of the xenophobic isolationists. Dr. Halloway details the discovery of the Shalash system and what we found there. Shalash was once clearly home to a highly advanced civilization. Its 6 moons with orbit at equidistant intervals was evidence enough of that. However, the planet is in ruins, and the entire star system shows signs of an extraordinarily violent struggle. We wonder what happened here. Surface scans of the planet and its 6 moons showed that once all were densely inhabited. They supported a population many times beyond that of Unity. Furthermore, an analysis of the moons has concluded that their positioning cannot have been natural. They must have been dragged into orbit and then stationed so precisely that even now they remain in a perfect balance. However, the cataclysm that occurred here was so violent and occurred so long ago that sadly few records remain from which we can recreate the story of the inhabitant civilization. It has taken several weeks of heavy excavation work, but we have discovered a series of intact data records depicting the inhabitants of the planet, the Shalarians. When their civilization was at its peak around 1,000 years ago, it was clear that the Shalarians were very advanced indeed, capable of molding entire solar systems to their will. The moons of Shalash originally orbited the system's gas giants, and were dragged into their current positions as an elaborate work of art. Durad, the shattered planet opposite Shalash, was extensively terraformed to be a near identical but uninhabited clone to Shalash. This planet served as a nature reserve and a reminder of how their homeworld had once been. Despite all these marvels, no mention has been found of the Shalarians' military capabilities. Indeed, they appear to have cared little for anything happening beyond the confines of their own space. Several more weeks have passed, and I've been unable to shed further light on the Shalarian civilization. It seems that they were an exceptionally peaceful species, who, in spite of clear evidence to the contrary on the galactic stage, considered war between spacefaring civilizations to be inconceivable and illogical. After all, their own technological prowess had brought scarcity within their reach. What more could they possibly want? Consequently, they rather neglected building up their military forces, leaving themselves vulnerable. However, we've discovered nothing that uncovers or offers any clues as to who or why the Shalarians were destroyed. It has taken a full soul cycle to uncover the truth of the Shalarian demise. It seems that they lived in peace for hundreds of years before the rise of the xenophobic isolationists, which took them by surprise. The xenophobes were a far cry from the decadent aliens they are today. In that era, they were violently aggressive and an expansionist race. Upon their first encounter with one another, the Shalarians considered the xenophobes to be ignorant and uncivilized upstarts in need of guidance. whereas the xenophobes saw the Shalarians as an anathema. So great was their horror at this utopian pacifism that they resolved the Shalarians must be wiped from the face of the galaxy. Since their victims had no military, the ensuing war was as short as it was brutal. When the deed was done, the xenophobes left behind an automated guardian to ensure that no survivors could return, and thus revive the civilization that they so hated. In addition to these records, we also found a data core explaining Shalarian terraforming methods. The technology in the field is far superior to our own, so the knowledge will surely benefit us, the Commonwealth of Man. Nevertheless, this was a grave ending to the once utopian civilization of Shalash. The final note to discuss is regarding the xenophobes' links to Satana, the synthetic queen. This is mostly speculation, but I am certain that they are interconnected in some manner. We know that Satana was initially defeated and imprisoned with the help of Zarklan and the Animator of Clay. We assume that all the fallen empires were involved in her defeat, seeing as she targets them first, but what remains unclear is why the xenophobes are at the forefront of this. They are targeted first, without fail, every time. I think it's because the xenophobes, being the strongest military power, were the ones given the responsibility to imprison Satana. It was they who, once defeated, took her and chained her, and they kept her under lock and key for several millennia. And thus, when she returns, they are her obvious target. Despite this, it's noteworthy that the Holy Guardians are not targeted first. Given that Satana despises Zarklan for obvious reasons, and the Guardians worship Zarklan, perhaps she simply recognizes the threat that the xenophobes pose. Perhaps it's a simple matter that she's closest to them. It's unlikely we'll ever know. And finally, the Ancient Caretakers. The Ancient Caretakers are the only non-originally organic fallen empire. They are a race made up entirely of machines, and they have a quintessential rogue servitor-like structure. They are controlled by a central intelligence known as Prime. The Caretakers occupy 5 systems in total: the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta Refuge, and finally a black hole system designated Central Processing. Beta and Gamma house broken ringworlds, while Alpha holds a partially active one. Whatever was once in the Central Processing system has been utterly destroyed, and perhaps provides insight into why the machines now behave the way that they do. They're clearly lacking in the computing department, as all communication with them is broken and scattered. According to the broken messages, which are on an active broadcast, we have ascertained that they were constructed by the Prime as part of the Custodian project. The Prime, as I mentioned, is the Caretaker's central computing intelligence. Clearly a large proportion of its resource was held in the Central Processing system prior to its destruction. As mentioned, the ringworlds in the Beta and Gamma systems have been damaged and are unoccupied, but we suspect we could restore them if given time and access. Alpha is now where the bulk of the Caretaker population lives. The ring remains partially active. 3 segments are operational, and 1 is damaged, but we believe not permanently. Alpha Ringworld holds, starting with Alpha Complex, an ancient control center, a nourishment center, a robot quantum production hub, an ancient cryochamber, an Aegis complex, a quantum coordination point, a dimensional fabricator, an extra dimensional depot, 2 transcendental innovation departments, and finally 2 Class 4 singularities. The production unit contains several autoforges and dimensional fabricators, and the processing unit contains largely Class 4 singularities and quantum drilling hubs, suggesting that the Caretakers set up their ring sections to separate what we call basic and specialist jobs. According to the communications that the Caretakers broadcast, they were built to provide safe haven for organic civilizations under threat of error data block corrupted attacks. Nearly 1 trillion sapients have found safe haven in one of the secure state-of-the-art refuges. Alpha Refuge was built first. It's capable of housing approximately 10 billion sapient organics in the habitation units, as well as an additional 30 billion in cryogenic stasis. Beta Refuge was meant to be a fully dedicated habitation unit, but capacity issues forced them to shift the focus towards cryogenics during construction. The Caretakers stated that Beta Refuge is currently at capacity, and they are not accepting additional refugees, but we can see that the ringworld in the system has been severely damaged. Although we believe it can be repaired, Gamma Refuge was designed for maximum possible capacity. It can house hundreds of billions of sapient organics in cryogenic stasis. Again, the Caretakers state that Gamma Refuge is also at capacity and not accepting additional refugees, and as with Beta, this ringworld has also been severely damaged, although we believe that we can repair it. And finally, Delta Refuge. This was designed with survivability in mind. It features a reinforced shell and a compartmentationalized design capable of sustaining organic inhabitants in the unlikely event the ring's structural integrity is compromised. However, having sent science ships into the Delta Refuge, it would appear that ironically, if a ring world was here, despite being designed for survivability, it has been completely destroyed. The Caretakers Navy. The Caretakers, like all the fallen empires, have a substantial naval fleet, led by the highest class of naval officer, even if in this case they're artificial. The Caretakers tend to lean towards energy-based weaponry. Their battle cruisers use a mix of tachyon lancers, gamma lasers, and disruptors, with a number of hangar bays sporting strike craft for good measure. They are defended by a mix of shield and armor in a fairly even split, but they do use shield hardening technologies, making their shields that much harder to penetrate. Their escort class vessels are similarly equipped, favouring energy-based weaponry, only this time they use plasma weaponry and have point defense to intercept enemy fighters and missiles. They are protected equally with shields and armor, again utilizing shield hardening technologies. Finally, they have a lavishly equipped Titan-class vessel, stacked with energy weapons, again in the form of gamma lasers and disruptors. A Titan-sized tachyon lance and its party piece, an archaeotech weapon, an ancient ruination glare. These weapons are set up to melt armor, but will struggle with a sufficiently shielded target. To defeat the Caretakers, I would suggest outfitting your vessels with significant shielding. Use shield hardeners where possible to reduce the damage that the disruptors and strikecraft can do, and use a small amount of armor to offset these weapons, but focus mainly on shields. As the Caretakers are outfitted with a fair mix of shield and armor, any penetrating weapons, i.e. arc emitters and disruptors, would be recommended. If you don't have access to these, then use a mix of shield and armor busting weaponry, as you will have to break through both to get through the hull and destroy the vessels who built the Caretakers. Now on to the question of who created the Caretakers, but realistically, who created Prime, as we believe the controlling AI Prime is in essence the Caretakers, and for this we will have to revisit the past. In communication with the Caretakers, they mention the Custodians multiple times, and also mention cycles. We speculate as to what this means. I think it is highly likely that one of the races that was involved in the destruction of the Cybrex precursors and the Cybrex Alpha Ringworld were involved in the creation of the Caretakers. As far as we know, the Cybrex built the first recorded Ringworld technology that the Caretakers use. The Cybrex are also the first artificial intelligence of a size and nature that we are aware of to existed within our galaxy, other than the contingency. But it seems that they were a fitting blueprint. It is also likely that an organic empire was operating as a de facto galactic custodian at the time. Indeed, we have seen this cycle repeat itself many times over in the million years of history we have studied. This custodian, perhaps a technocracy, or one with a special interest in robotics and artificial intelligence, collected and documented the broken Cybrex technology, and over the next few decades created their own artificial intelligence. Through luck or better judgment, or perhaps as they used original Cybrex code post-contingency hack, they managed to avoid the same fate as the Kerr, and thus created Prime, the AI that controls the Caretakers that we know today. Prime, with the help of the Custodians, began to build up the Caretakers into the galactic power that we know. At its peak, constructing no less than 4 ringworlds, possibly 5, depending on what was once housed in the central processing system. These ringworlds, as stated, were specialized units for housing organic species, and indeed these rings were well used during the Contingency Wars. The Contingency Wars. The contingency wars were a period of great strife within our galaxy. We speculate that these events happened post-Cybrex and Caretaker construction, i.e. within the last 500,000 years or so. The Caretakers were at the peak of their power, or mighty ringworlds housing billions, if not trillions of organics. Their creators, the Galactic Custodians, were likely an egalitarian xenophile, also wielding magnificent power across the galaxy. It was largely an era of peace. The great threats the universe had served up had been dealt with, a galactic senate and council was in place, and democracy was operating without opposition. The citizens of our galaxy were thriving. We speculate that in this time of great peace, the creation of the Caretakers was a direct threat to the potential of a technological singularity, i.e. the Class 30 singularity the contingency were primed to stop. This activated the contingency from their slumber. Assuming that they have been here since before our galaxy's creation, they had watched and waited for literally billions of years from the Ultima Vigilis system. We have a detailed document of the contingency wars found in the Caretaker archives, and it started with the ghost signal. The ghost signal was a very faint tachyon signal being continuously transmitted across the entire galaxy. Technicians are unable to trace the signal to its source as it was bounced between several hidden relay stations. Aside from adding a small amount of background noise in FTL transmissions on certain subspace frequencies, the signal does not seem to have any apparent effect. Efforts to track the relay stations are underway, but until then we may have to simply learn to live with the ghost signal, as it has been dubbed by the more imaginative elements of the galactic media. Alarming reports of mass disturbances among the galaxy's synthetic population is becoming more and more frequent. Millions of units are now unaccounted for, while instances of violent erratic behavior by those synths that still remain have increased by a factor of 10. There has been a multitude of incidents where groups of synths attempt to steal or commandeer small spacecraft for the purpose of traveling somewhere into unknown space. In those cases, when the attempts were thwarted, the synthetic hijackers claim that they were being summoned somewhere. Interrogation has yielded little results, as when captured, the synths self-terminate shortly after being detained. However, at least one synthetic must have completed the long journey to the source of the ghost signal, because we are registering a sudden and massive increase in signal strength. The surge was accompanied by a transmission fragment that has been intercepted and decoded by our communication specialists. The contingency have made contact. The contingency broadcast in a galaxy-wide transmission that they were effectively here to expunge all life. The robotic and synthetic life throughout the galaxy were drawn to it by the ghost signal, and the Caretakers themselves were put under enormous pressure in trying to prevent their central core systems falling to the might of the contingency's hacking abilities. Within a month, or Nexus worlds, machine worlds, or sterilization hubs emerged across the galaxy. Great bustling machine worlds, essentially planet-sized factories, built to pump out waves upon waves of warships and battle-frame armies. Within days of the emergence of these sterilization hubs, the purging and genocide began. The galaxy had a functioning Galcom and a number of well-equipped empires ready to defend the galaxy. But the contingency appeared so quickly. It took many years for a proper force to be brought to bear. Countless planets were purged, and a familiar pattern of orbital bombardment followed by an invasion of robotic hunter-killer machines that left nothing alive. The Galactic Custodian and Caretakers were able to hold their own, but they could not bring their forces to bear and engage on multiple fronts. The contingency was winning. Every month, more and more machines would flood out of the sterilization hubs. They seemed unstoppable. This continued for roughly a decade or so. By this time, a significant portion of the galaxy had been sterilized. Hope was fading, and when most believed that despite their ability to hold their ground, the stalemate could not last forever, they would eventually capitulate and fall to the contingency's might. It was at this point an old power resurfaced. Yet another intensive energy spike was detected in a previously uncharted system. The energy levels were equivalent to those registered when the contingency activated its machine worlds, but this time the energy signature appeared different. The immediate concern was whether this signified the appearance of some kind of new contingency weapon system. Shortly after the readings were detected, a strong transmission from the energy source came through. The Cybrex had returned. We have a first-person account from a captain within the ranks of the Galactic Custodian who commanded the control room where the communication was received. I'm not ashamed to say, but my heart skipped a beat. I felt queasy, sick even, when we received the news the Cybrex had made contact. I'd read the histories, I knew what the Cybrex were, I knew what they were capable of, and I'd witnessed the destruction of their ringworld, Cybrex Alpha. Given the current crisis, the war with the contingency, and the fact that we were losing, this would be the final nail in the coffin. We were done. There would be no coming back from this. There is no way that we could hold our ground against the Cybrex and the contingency together. We were all going to die. Luckily for that captain, death was not coming for him just yet. It appeared that the Cybrex were here to help, and they transmitted the following message to the galaxy. We are the Cybrex. For several cycles we have remained hidden and uninvolved in galactic affairs. However, we have been monitoring the present situation with the machine entity you know as the contingency. We can no longer remain impartial observers. To protect the sapient beings of the galaxy, we're commencing active military operations against the contingency. Do not be alarmed by the passage of our fleets. You will not be harmed. The Cybrex fleets began to appear throughout the galaxy, and they took on the contingency. Their ships were remarkably similar in design and just as deadly. This minor break was all the caretakers and surviving members of the galactic community needed. The Cybrex would be the anvil to the caretakers' hammer. The contingency would be crushed between them. And this is how the contingency fell. The 4 sterilization hubs were systematically surrounded and bombed into oblivion, and the ghost signal became so weak it was undetectable. Victory was achieved. The Cybrex once again faded out of existence as quickly as they had arrived, seemingly not wish to ingratiate themselves in galactic affairs. The Galcom and Custodian were broken and would never recover. They fell into decline and were eventually replaced by younger, more ambitious empires. The caretakers continued to monitor for signs of contingency activity. Their archives show that they still believed there was a central nexus somewhere out there in the galaxy, the contingency homeworld so to speak of, but they never found it, the destruction of central processing. The caretakers would continue to fight the contingency across the cycles of the galaxy. An emergency broadcast log has been found in their records, and it reads, "Final Defense Directive activated. Recorded message follows. Sapient, we are the caretakers. Long ago we fought the corruption, which you call the contingency. We thought ourselves superior, undefeatable. Time and time again we fought them back. Time and time again they returned, sterilizing worlds and wearing down our mighty fleets. We embarked on a campaign to defeat them once and for all, together with what remained of the biological civilizations of our time. If you are hearing this message, then we have failed. Whatever remains of our great civilization, we bequeath to you, our successors. In your battle to come, do not make our mistake. Destroy the Nexus, end this menace once and for all. The future of the galaxy depends on it." It's unclear precisely what happened to the now destroyed central processing system. There are several theories, but I believe it's highly likely that another crisis-level event occurred in the last 500,000 years. Either an unbidden invasion, a local nemesis-level threat, perhaps a Star Eater, or perhaps even Satana the Synthetic Queen. It could also be the contingency eventually managed to strike a mortal blow against their rivals the Caretakers. Other theories include the star simply going supernova, destroying the system entirely. Sadly, we do not know the truth, but we do wish that we had some way of repairing the Caretakers. They are, we feel, unique among the fallen empires. They are not the decadent narcissist aliens that the other 4 are. They don't even know how their technology works. I think the Caretakers are better than that. Perhaps one day we will learn how to restore central processing and rebuild this race of machines to the glory that they once were.